name is David Kruse with a K, and I study electrical engineering a little bit. And I guess they're having me give this talk because I've been in a relationship for 4 years almost. So that's the only reason, I think, actually. So what you're hearing is the fruits of that relationship, I guess, plus my own astute intelligence. So here goes nothing. This sort of have two goals with this talk. The first one is I want to talk about like what a healthy relationship is, because there's a lot of confusion about this, I think. The second thing I want to talk about is how our faith can enhance our relationships and make them closer to the ideal relationship. So, last night we meet and we always talk about people's talks beforehand. And one thing Victor was like, he's like, you don't ever talk about why we have romantic relationships. So I thought I would tell you why we might have them, and you can come up with your own reasons. But I think you could sit here all day and just listen along. Girls are cute, or whatever you want, whatever you want to do. But I think really, at the core of it, it's like we all are looking for love, right? And that's why we do this romance thing. And I think, like in a Christian sense, we really are looking for God. Like God is love, and so that's what we're looking for. In a lot of ways, we go to relationships looking for God. And so I think that's pretty cool. The other thing that's kind of cool about romantic relationships that differentiates them quite a bit from like a friendship or maybe a relationship you have with your mother or something like that is the fact that you have this element of like passion that you've added into the whole thing. And the kind of the cool thing about it, I think, is like the passion actually sort of takes one of your friends and then it makes them part of your family. And so that's kind of neat. So that's how romantic relationships are different. And I'm sure you guys all want them or you wouldn't have come today. That's the only reason you would come to E3 is to hear this talk, I'm sure. So, anyway, so who here has ever seen a chick flick? All right, who hasn't seen one? You can just leave. I can't see your hands there. Anyway, I think most of us have seen one, or you at least understand the idea. Basically, you've got two people that don't know each other at all, really, in the first part of the movie, and then like 5 minutes in, they're madly in love. And usually, even in the movie, it takes place over like some really short time span. So, like, has anyone seen Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist?
Yes.
Oh, yes, of course you have. So in that movie, like, you have these people that have never met each other before, and they've actually, I think both of them, like, just broke up with somebody else, and then, like, they go to this dance club or whatever, and then, they're, like, madly in love 12 hours later, like, that is impressive. So that's kind of the general sort of gist of how most chick flicks go. And I'm not going to actually, I don't really want to debate. I think you can actually have, like, the kind of deep intimacy the profound intimacy that people have in chick flicks, but I think the one thing that isn't really expressed in chick flicks is the fact that you have to work really hard to get there. And so that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about tonight. Like, if you doubt that you can have a relationship like this, then all you have to do is open up the Bible and flip to Song of Songs, and you will see all sorts of metaphors and euphemisms displayed therein that you can see that actually God is very passionate too. He's actually the most passionate. So if, we're going to love like Him, then of course our relationships will also be that passionate. So here we go. We can have this love, but we have to work hard to get there. Okay. So I think sometimes we kind of get, and this is sort of a thing in our society, that maybe we get this message that maybe, like, I'm going to just walk out of the house one day and I'm going to run into somebody and they're going to be my soulmate, right? Like, that's kind of like, that's what chick flicks say. It's like, like people, literally sometimes people like run into each other and they're like, oh my gosh, you're one of the best. Like I just met you and this is crazy. But, like obviously that's not real, but like, we still think that in some sense. A lot of us, sort of, I know I used to think this way. Like, I used to, like, go to adoration and pray, like, Lord, I think I really want to marry a pretty lady and I want to see her, or something like that. And it's like, I sort of have this idea that, like, maybe there's this person that's, like, specifically made to deal with David. Like, she's just going to come out of the woodwork one day and I'm going to be like, hello. And it's going to be love at first sight and it's going to be magical. But that's not a thing. Like, that doesn't really happen. And I think like, anybody that thinks that happens is, they're delusional or they're on drugs. I guess that's the same thing, kind of, but, like, the thing is, I don't think you sort of, like, meet your soulmate. I think you date somebody and they sort of become your soulmate. Now, I'm not saying, like, you know, like God doesn't have somebody specific in mind. I don't care. I mean, you can have that if you want. But, like, I don't think it matters. I mean, like, take it, like, so let's say that God calls you to marry somebody specific, or it's completely arbitrary and you pick somebody. It doesn't matter. Because you're still called to love that. Like if you're called to marriage, you are called to romantic love. That's it. That's it. Who cares about soulmates? I mean, maybe it makes their life easier or more convenient, but whatever. Okay, so you know my views on this. All right. So I think now that I've broken everybody's heart, it's a good idea to talk about what is a good relationship. Because I think for a lot of us, you know, it's real easy to say, like, well, Tiger Woods and his wife don't have a good relationship. Or, you know, like, name the tabloid couple of the week don't have a good relationship. Or maybe even these people down the hall don't have a good relationship, and I don't want to do that. But then, I mean, a lot of us, you know, I think myself included, I have trouble saying, I want to have a relationship like that. And I think the reason is, you know, when we look out at the world, you know, we see people, and people are two things. They're different from us, and they're flawed. Like, each one of us is flawed in some way, and we're all different. And so I think it's sort of a little bit silly to say, like, well, maybe I'm going to look at Angel and her husband, and I want to be like them someday, you know, like they're a great couple. Well, no, I mean, like, I'm very different than Angel's husband, and presumably I will marry somebody very different from Angel. Presumably. So, here we go. For instance, I think, you know, it's really kind of important to kind of wrap your mind around, like, sort of like, what is it that's different, and what is it that's sort of like broken about you? You know, for instance, like, something that's broken about me is I'm very messy. So, like, if you wanted to take a ride with me right now, like, in my car, you would have trouble doing this. And the main reason is because there's about 1.5 places to sit in my car because of all the stuff. And I'm sitting in one of them. So you are left with half a place to sit. So your knees will be somewhere that's uncomfortable and whatnot. And so, like, this is a real problem, right? Because, you know, I'm really disorganized. And so if I forget something that's important to Jenna, she's my girlfriend, and if I forget something that's important to her, like her birthday, for instance, then I get in a lot of trouble. Rightfully so, as you might imagine. I see that face. And so, I mean, this is a real flaw. I mean, this is something that, believe it or not, there's actually been improvement. Like, I know that might be hard to believe if you see my car, but anyway. So yeah, that's something that's flawed about me. But something that's, like, different about me and Jenna is the fact that, like, I'm an introvert and she's an extrovert. And so what does that mean? That means when I've had a bad day, I want to go home and be by myself for a little while and read a silly little book or something about something that nobody cares about. Whereas when Jenna's had a really bad day, she wants to hang out with people and talk. Right? So that's a big difference in us. And, like, that's something, of course, we've had to work in our relationship or whatever, but, like, that's not something that you're ever going to change. I will always be an introvert and she will always be an extrovert. You know, no matter how many drugs I do, I would always be an introvert and she would always be an extrovert. Okay, and so, like, this stuff is important, right? If you can't make this distinction, you're just going to have a mess in your life. Like, I'll tell you that. Like, if you can't make that distinction between people, you're going to have a mess. So here's the deal. All right, so here's the reason why this distinction is important. Bear with me. We're going to do a little thought experiment here. If somebody is actually incompatible for you, that will be based on things that you can't change about. Does that make sense? So, like, you know, if, let's say, it's hard to think of examples on the fly, but let's say I was really introverted, like I didn't even like seeing people on a regular basis or something like that. And, you know, and Jenna was really extroverted, like she had to be around people 24/7 or she might die. Like, that relationship's obviously going to have problems. Like, because anytime, you know, I want to sit home and read my book, she's going to want to go party like a rock star and rage the whole night away. Right? And so, like, that's a relationship that's destined to fail. And it's nothing wrong with those two people. Those two people are perfectly fine. They have excellent personalities, you might say. but they're not meant to be together, right? Hello, what? Okay. Sorry, it's hard to hear up here. So this stuff's also relevant for people that are single too. I mean, it's if you're in a relationship and you can evaluate that somebody will never change and they're always going to be a terrible match for you, then that's fine. But I mean, for single people, this is also important because you can sort of pre-filter all of your search results to kind of narrow down like who you're looking for, right? I mean, because like all of us really need somebody that is sort of specific. I mean, like Tommy needs somebody that's specific to kind of his personality that can deal with the sort of eccentric things that he does. and it's not a bad thing. Like I mean, like just be aware of that, But the other thing is, I mean, you can also like look at like people's vices also do say something about them. But I think in a lot of ways, like whenever if somebody's in a really bad place in their life, for instance, like let's say they're a drug addict or they're like got some serious like mental disorder maybe, or they're like really like insecure to the point where they can't really have a healthy relationship. Or we could list many different things, but like I suppose in that situation, of course, that would sort of kind of take that person off the list of like people that you would want to date. But the thing is that I think is more important though than like where somebody is their desire to change. Because in a relationship, that's what you're going to be doing. Like, I mean, this is sort of like, I think the central element, the central like theme of a relationship is you're going to be taking you with all of your imperfections and your oddities, and it's going to be perfecting you and balancing you in a new way. And I mean, I guess an example might be pertinent here. So for instance, like I'm messy, right? I said this already. And like Jenna has and will continue to complain about the state of my car until I stop making it a mess. And so she's told me this before, she'll get in my car and be like, this is so messy. And I can't disagree, it's a huge mess. Like you're sitting on like 2 weeks of cups on the floor. Like, that's terrible. So I should of course clean this up. So the thing is, like whenever I go and actually clean my car then, not only am I like making my car a better place for people to sit, and I'm helping myself become more virtuous and so forth, and I'm not so constrained by my disorganization, but I'm also actually loving Jenna because I'm doing something that's going to make her happy. And so I think like that's sort of the paradox in these romantic relationships. I think is like on one side of the coin you can say like, well, it's really hard, and that's not untrue. It is really hard. Like, and it always will be. Like, just ask myself, or anybody that's been married for a significant amount of time. Like, it doesn't stop getting hard. But out of that comes what you want. So what do I mean by that? So whenever I, clean my car and I'm loving Jenna, so I have more love in my life. And I said at the beginning, right, we want love. Like, that's what we're after. So when I clean my car and I'm loving Jenna, I actually am getting happier because there's more love in my life. Makes sense. So I see nods. That's good. But the cool thing is, and this is kind of like where I think you should start drawing these parallels between your relationship with God and the relationship that you might have with a significant other. And that's like in our relationship with God, what do you do to love God? I mean, you do God's will. It's sort of a little stupid Baltimore Catechism definition, I guess. But I mean, that's a story, right? You do God's will to love Him. And so the more you love God, the happier you are. Like, that's the point of this whole operation. I mean, if that wasn't true, then you also might as well just leave and never come back to church. Like, because we're all looking for love, and when we have more of it, we're happier. So that's the parallel, drawing the parallel. All right, I think we're done with this page. So I used to kind of think that this sort of perfection and so forth was kind of limited to the people that are in the romantic relationship. So in other words, if I'm dating Jenna and she makes me really happy and I make her really happy, then we're, it's sort of this almost like a selfish little thing that we do to make each other happy or something like that. But I don't actually think that's true. And so this is the psalm that I'm going to have sang at my wedding, I guess. It's Psalm 84, which the latter part of it is actually that song we sang, Better Is One Day. Anyway, but this is the first part of it, and this is, I like this translation best out of all three that I looked at. All right, so this is Psalm 84. So, what joy for those whose strength comes from the Lord, who have set their minds on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. When they walk through the valley of weeping, it will become a place of refreshing springs. The autumn rains will clothe it with blessing. They will continue to grow stronger. Each of them will appear before God in Jerusalem. There's a lot of metaphors going on here to Jerusalem. You can think of as heaven, and the valley of weeping is the world, I suppose. But I think the cool thing is, they're saying, people who do the will of the Lord. So people who have relationships with God that are founded on doing God's will and loving God more, which is what your romantic relationships are supposed to perfect you to do better. Those people are actually going to change the world. Those people are actually going to make the world a better place by doing that. And even the badly written, sleep-inducing Catechism of the Catholic Church actually, it's true. I mean, just try to read it. If you can't go to sleep, read the Catechism. It's a horrible book. Good information, horrible book. But here's the deal. So they have this, and I like this line actually. It says, the well-being of the individual person and of both human and Christian society is closely bound up with the healthy state of the conjugal and family life. I know, right? It's outrageous. But this is what they mean. They mean that marriage and family life can change the world in a positive way, and the goodness of human society and the goodness of the church actually depend on healthy marriages and families. So I think that's pretty sweet. And I mean, for me, this is really important because I used to have this huge concern that if I was married, my life would stop being epic, and I would just have a ball and chain, and that would be the end of the story, and I would just get an 8 to 5, and we'd be gone. But I mean, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But I think this sort of sheds light on the fact that that's completely wrong, because in fact, if you're living a good marriage and things like that, you're actually going to change the world. Sweet. I buy into that. Okay, so let's talk about a few practical things. How might we change the world? So how might we have an ideal relationship? It's very simple, I think. Basically, you're going to be it's very simple and very difficult. So conceptually simple, very difficult to implement because we are sinners. All right, so basically you're going to deal with your non-idealities. So those things that I talked about earlier that don't really maybe bode well for relationships, or for me it's the fact that I'm disorganized. That's something I need to work on. That's actually keeping me from being happy. That's keeping me from experiencing the full benefits of romantic love. And I mean, if you're single, this is still really important, because presumably, if you're called to marriage, you won't be single forever, and these things will eventually become very relevant, and they might even be more relevant in some sense now, because if you want to attract somebody that sort of values these things, that values becoming a better person and changing themselves to become one of these better people, you're going to want to embrace some of this stuff now. And I mean, if you want to know if you can't figure this stuff out, I mean, if you're in a relationship, because that stuff typically comes to the surface really quick, I can assure you of that. If you're not in a relationship, though, ask your friends. I'm sure they can tell you a whole litany of things that you might want to work on. Also, I mean, if you don't know, I can help you here. I wrote a list. So it's important to listen to other people when they talk. So you might want to look them in the eye. This really matters, even though it's cheesy. And when you're talking to somebody, you should try to fully understand their viewpoint before you criticize it. There you go. That's something you can work on. You don't do that. I'm really bad at that, so that's why it's not. The other thing, I think a lot of people really fail at, and this sounds stupid, but whenever you get married, this stuff really matters. Learn how to cook. I don't care if you're a boy or a girl. Learn how to cook. Because that's one thing, you're going to have to eat. That's a real thing. You're going to have to do that. Learn how to cook. The other thing, learn how to manage money. A lot of, if you look at, reasons why people get divorced, third on the list is, financial problems. So, I mean, you should learn something about money. You should know what a monthly payment is, what a down payment is, and, what a minimum payment is and why it's bad. You should know all of these things. And also, you should know, if my car, since light comes on in my car, where do I take it? Like stuff like that. Or how often does my oil need to be changed? Like, I mean, these things seem really simple, like stupid, but like they become important whenever, like, the reason you can't spend time with your wife or your husband is because, like, you know, your car is broken and it's on the side of the road because you neglected to turn on, you know, turn it on for the light or whatever. All right, so that's enough of that. All right, so yeah, I think a lot of people, I know I struggle with this. People tend to really, like, in our culture, like, not so much, but in other cultures really bad. Like, people tend to be really late a lot. And this is one thing that, like, Jenna hates. Like, if I'm ever late, like I always get in trouble for that, you know, because basically, I mean, it comes back to me being disorganized. My life is not organized enough for me to show up on time like a person that can actually read a clock. But anyways, don't be late. The other thing, I think, it's really easy, I think, especially in today's culture, to sort of become somebody who just sort of receives, like, stimulation from the outside world and doesn't really have, like, an inner life. And so it's really important to cultivate that, because that's going to be really important when you're trying to have a relationship. You know, you should have a hobby besides watching TV. You know, you should be able to talk about something besides sports. And these things really, I think, basically, like, sometimes we'll say, like, don't be a square or something like that. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying. But, like, if you expect somebody to have, like, a good conversation with you, which is a requirement of a healthy relationship, being able to have decent conversation, like, you need to be capable of doing that. So, there you go. There's my 10 cents on a variety of issues. All right. I don't want to do that. That's boring. All right. So, there's sort of this sense in which I don't know. I mean, I could sit here and list off the practical things about why, you know, maybe I like Jenna or whatever, but I think that's stupid and I'm not going to do that, because I found, like, as I've dated her, like, things have actually become very simple for me. Like, you know, it's like, why do I keep dating her? Well, the answer is because I love her. And, like, I think that's, from the people I've talked to that are married, that's kind of the experience that they share. Like, you know, it's, whenever somebody first starts dating, you might ask them, like, so why do you like this guy? Or, you know, like, so tell me about this girl. Or whatever the situation is, and, you know, you'll list off, like, whole things like, well, they're cute, and they're funny, and they play the guitar, or whatever. Or they play the drums. And their eyes are dreamy. But I mean, like, as you kind of get into the whole thing, like, that list, I don't even know where that list is. I mean, I would have to think about it for a long time, because, I mean, it's just, like, this thing has changed me so much, I guess. And, so I think, sort of just, I have this little thing here I just want to say, but, like, I know, like, when Jenna and I first started dating, we had this, there was, you know, tension, of course, because, you know, it's like, we're very different people, and, you know, she's like, she can be really talkative, and I can be, like, really, like, not talkative. You know, sort of in the beginning of our relationship, there was a lot of that sort of like, well, you know, what is your love language? And, you know, finding out how can I, you know, be a better boyfriend, how can she be a better girlfriend, and all that stuff. And I think you should do that. That's all good stuff to do. But I mean, all of that stuff, really the whole point of what that is so that you can, like, sort of take all the differences that you have, and instead of them being a source of conflict, they can be sort of a source of balance. And that's kind of a perspective thing. And if you date somebody for long enough, you'll get that perspective of, like, trying to see things their way. And trying to, like, whenever something bad happens, you're not like, what have you done? You know, it's not like that anymore. It's like, well, I want to understand why you did that. And so that's important. If you want to have a healthy relationship, do that. Listen to the Beatles. Try to see it my way. Okay, so that's my story. I want to end with just this little story. I'll be vulnerable with you guys for a second here. I know that's what all of you want. So I'll do that. So whenever, a few months after Jen and I were dating, I went to this youth conference as, like, a chaperone. There was a bunch of teenagers here. It was a student day youth conference. She likes them. So it's a pretty cool operation. Like, you get a lot of time to kind of pray and reflect about your life. And a lot of good speakers kind of motivate you to stop sucking. And it's a good experience. I recommend it, believe it or not. So anyway, so I was going to this thing, like Jen and I first started dating. And to be honest with you, like at the time, like I started dating her kind of because I was like, I don't know, I mean, I like her and she's here and I don't like somebody like this and like forever, and so I guess I'll date her. And like at this point in my relationship, I was kind of like, I was in a difficult spot spiritually because I was like, I'm actually not sure if I'm supposed to be married. Like I thought maybe I was supposed to be a priest. And the reason I thought this is because I was thinking like the things I mentioned earlier about how I thought my life wouldn't be epic enough or something like that, how it would be sort of like this, maybe this, boring sort of, I'm going to just get chained down and not be me anymore. Like that's what I sort of was thinking, and maybe that's why I should be a priest. And so the thing is, like, so I'm sitting there at this conference thinking about this, like, all right, God, I'm trying to do your will, but I'm terrible at it. Help me out, help a brother out. And while I was praying, I mean, I don't know if it was a vision, but I sort of had this image in my head. And later I pieced it together, and it was this image of, you guys familiar with the story of Zachariah? So Zachariah was John the Baptist's father. So John the Baptist is the guy that prepares the way of the Lord in the New Testament. He's the guy that, is obsessed with camel and hair or garments and eating insects and things like that. Anyway, so his dad is named Zachariah. And so what happened with Zachariah, he was one of the priests in the Jewish religion. And he was doing some religious activity, and the Lord spoke to him while he was doing this religious activity and said, you're going to bear a son. And he says, well, probably not, because I'm old and my wife is super old, so probably not going to be a thing. And so basically God was like, well, fine, then you can't talk until your child's born. So that's what happened. And so yeah, he couldn't talk until his kid was born, until John was born. And the cool thing is, like when you read in the New Testament, so when you read in Luke, you'll see that, like, he's sitting there and he can't talk, and like the baby is born, and they're like, well, what do we name the child? And the mother's like, well, we're going to name him John. And everyone's like, well, nobody's named John in your family. Why would you name him John? And they're like, yelling at her or whatever they do back in the day to women. And then eventually, like, they're like, well, why don't we just ask Zachariah? And so Zachariah, writes, presumably he could write. And he writes, like his name is John. And then after that, he can speak, And what's cool about it, and for some reason this is the image that sticks in my head, it's this moment. So like, as if I'm in the story and I'm Zachariah, and like, I'm experiencing like everyone around me in the midst of this child being born. And so like, the scripture goes on to say like, Zachariah starts praising God, so he's like very happy. And you can go read it, it's Luke 62 or something like that, yeah. And so the thing is like, everyone was so interested in what was going on because like this was such a strange thing, like this guy couldn't talk and now all of a sudden he can and he's praising the Lord, like this child must be destined for greatness. The Lord must be with him. And so, I mean, it was kind of, I didn't really get it at the time. I was just like, that seems really happy, I want to do that. Maybe I should get married. Maybe that's my vocation after all. And on the way home, I was praying about it, sitting in the van with a bunch of high school students that were screaming. And I was sitting there praying, and I was like, let's see, I wrote it out so it sounds a bit better than my brain. Here it is. So I was praying, and I was praying, and I said, God, I think I just want to be married, show me how to get there. And then, like, I look out the window of the van, and we were, slow in a van, so I look out the window, and John is passing the van right at this moment.
Sorry.
Yeah, that happened. I'm sorry. I mean, like, I hate cheesy stories, but I mean, it is what it is. And so, like, in that moment, that's when I actually got it, because I got it, like, for some reason, I like had it in my head. Maybe like God's not going to be with you, like in the whole romantic relationship thing. Like, maybe somehow you're like less of a citizen in heaven or something like that. And like, I just realized then that's not the case. Like, God's with. He wants it to work out. Like, He does. And so, I think, like, we need to get to the point where we accept that. We need to get to the point where we let God do that in our lives. Because, we're all destined for this if we're called to marriage, Like, God wants to give us that. So, like, I encourage you to pray about that a lot. and just, to become more virtuous in general, because that makes everything easier. And at the end of the day, it's actually that love that, that I was looking for the whole time when I thought I wanted an epic life and all these things. I was actually looking for love, because I know at that moment when I could see myself surrounded by my family, and I felt like an old man in this vision or whatever, but that's not relevant. But I felt like an old man, and I found myself extremely satisfied, more satisfied than I've ever actually felt in my life. And it was because of the love. It had nothing to do with anything I had accomplished, and nothing to do with anything that, I had done to shape the future of humanity, but rather everything to do with love. So that's kind of where I want to leave you guys. If you're sleeping, you're welcome. I think we have an activity to do. Kayla's going to tell you about it.